Welcome back. In this video, we are going to actually start working with some of these CSS transitions. And we are going to be working with creating those seasons files where we looked at changing the opacity and the size. So for this, you will need your class 2 lab folder that you downloaded. It was a zip file that you downloaded from Learn at UW Stout. And inside of that folder, you're going to see that there are more folders called delays, easing, and seasons. And these are each of them that we will be working with over the next few exercises. In this one, we are going to be working with seasons. And eventually, as we finish these exercises, you will be uploading this class 2 lab folder to your web space and creating some links to it. So without further ado, let's get started. For exercises 1 and 2, we will be working with the seasons folder. So go ahead and look inside that folder. And we are going to see size HTML, opacity HTML, and the images that are being used. I've already created the HTML for you because I want the focus of this exercise to be on the CSS and not so much on the HTML. Okay, so you can leave this in the class 2 lab and you will be actually moving this entire folder up to your web space when we are complete, and you will be able to see how each of these functions, and you're going to be creating a link to each of these at the end of the last video as well. So we're going to start out with the first one. We're going to go into seasons and we're going to start with opacity. So I'm going to go ahead and open up opacity with Dreamweaver or whatever text editor that you happen to be using, and we're just going to take a quick look at this. So here is the code. You'll see I've given it a title so we know what it is. There's an H2, there's a paragraph, and then there is these images. But the images aren't here because I'm calling up the images via CSS. So if we go and take a look at this file right now, I'm just going to do a preview and go into Google Chrome. There's not going to be anything here, and there's nothing that's going to happen. All of this will be controlled with CSS, and that's what we are going to be building next. So the next thing you need to do is create a new CSS document. So in Dreamweaver, I'm just going to go to File, New, make sure I select CSS, and Create. And right away, I am going to go ahead and save this. I am going to find where I need to go. Okay, so here's where we are, and I am in seasons. This is where I want to be, and this is going to be our opacity. So I'm just going to call this opacity .css, and I'm going to save that. So now the two are in the same folder, so now I can go back to my HTML document, and within the head, I'm going to go ahead and link that as an external style sheet. So if we remember, that is link and type, and it's a text CSS. We need it's relative, it's a style sheet. Oops, I got to type that correctly. There we go. And then the href, which is where it's located. I'm going to let it browse for it. It should be right in the same folder. And then I'll close that up. So now they are linked, but I don't have anything in here, so it's not going to change anything yet. And I'm going to go ahead and save my opacity.html just so it saves at the style sheet. This is all you will need to do to this document. From here on out, we're going to be working in the CSS file. So the first thing that we need to do is we're going to look through our styles. I'm sorry, I keep bouncing back and forth. But that's the way this is going to be working. So the first thing is, if we look at the particular styles that we have a div class box. We don't actually really see this box, but we need to give it some spacing, and this is what's going to allow us to center our items in the middle of the page. So if we recall how to create a class, period box, I'll open and close it right away. And I am calling this width 586. Don't ask how I came by that number. And a margin of, we're going to get it so that it's 40 pixels from the top. And we want it automatically left and right, so therefore it's centered. And overflow is hidden, and what this does is it makes sure that the items that are in, this has to do with the collapsing of certain classes when you're doing float lefts, which we are going to be doing with the images themselves. So we've established our width, we've said where we want this box to appear, and we've said that we don't want it to collapse and that it'll overflow. Let's go back and see what else we need to do. Next, we're going to create season box. As you'll notice, each of these classes has two different styles, or each of these divs has two different class styles associated with it. We have season box and winter. So we're going to go create season box, and we'll see how this stuff works here in a moment. Oops. It's a class. Season box just defines what each of them have in common. For example, each of the season boxes has the same height, and it's 185 pixels. Each box has the same width, which is 281 pixels. And these are actually the sizes of the images themselves. Each box has a border radius. We're going to curve those edges so they're not square. We're going to give it a border radius of 5. And we're going to float them all left. So what's going to happen is each of these will float left within that box up at the top. So we're going to float left. We're going to set the opacity. This is the important one, because we are going to be transitioning the opacity. So we're going to set our default opacity at, basically it's 50%, 0.5. For right now, I'm going to leave this because we're going to have our transition effect going to go into place here. But for right now, this is what I need to set up. And we're going to come back and add that transition. And now, if you recall, now we have to go through each of these seasons. We have winter, spring, summer, fall, and this is what's going to control the image that's in each of these. So we're going to start with winter. So we have my mouse there, winter, and we need background image. So we're going to go find background image. I'm going to browse for this, and it should be located within the images folder. And we're starting with winter, so we're going to look for the one called winter and click open. And so there is our image. We are going to give this a margin, and each of these margins you'll see I've got them set up so that they're all spaced so that they look all pretty within the bigger box. So we're going to give this a margin of 8 pixels on the top, 4 pixels on the right, 4 pixels on the bottom, and 8 pixels on the left. So that is now our winter box. And if we go ahead and save this and make sure that our opacity HTML is also saved, and we go preview, I'm going to go out to Google Chrome, we have a box. And remember, we put this in that bigger box that was set at 586 pixels, and we centered it, and we placed it with some gap in here of about 40 pixels. So now we've got this to the left, but notice it doesn't do anything because we haven't set up our transition yet. Go back to Dreamweaver, and now we're going to make each of these for spring, summer, and fall. And because they each have different images, I can't shortcut this and put these all in the same style because they have different background images. So now we're going to go to spring. And just like we did before, we're going to do background image. And I'm just going to browse for it. It should be in that folder again called spring. And this one I'm also going to give a margin. And this one we're going to give 8 pixels on top. So notice that part's consistent. 8 pixels on bottom. Or I'm sorry, 8 pixels on the top on the right. Let's see, then 4 pixels on the bottom and 4 pixels on the left. And I'm going to close this style, and I'm immediately going to go into, well, actually, hold on. Before we do that, I'm going to go save, and we're going to go take a look at our what our web page is looking like so far. So I'm going to go back out to Chrome. I'm just going to click refresh, and because I've used float left, it automatically pulls that image up next to it. So when we're done, we're going to have a grid of the 4 seasons. So now I'm going to go back to Dreamweaver, and we're going to continue creating our styles. So now we are going to go to summer. And let me just scroll here a little bit so we can see what's going on. Just like before, we're doing the background image. And I'm going to browse for it. And we're looking for summer this time. And this one, we're also going to apply a margin. And this one gets a margin of 4 pixels on top, 4 pixels to the right, 8 pixels on the bottom, and 8 pixels on the left. And I'm going to save this, and we're going to go back out and take a look, and then refresh. And because it's float left and our box is set at that 586 and these images only 2 can fit, it all automatically will go to the next row, so to speak. It'll fall underneath. So that last image will go in here. So let's go back and put in our final image, which is fall. Open and close that. And fall, we are going to do a background image again. Browse for it. And we're looking for fall. I'm going to scroll here so we can see what's going on. And margin. And I'll show you in a second why all these margins are different. 4 pixels, 8 pixels, 8 pixels, and 4 pixels. Ultimately, what this is doing is it's creating an 8-pixel edge around each image. But the 4 pixels in here, for example, winter, we have 4 pixels on the right-hand side, but spring, we have 4 pixels on the left-hand side. So these work together to create 8 pixels in between the 2 images. So that's why some of these are 4 and some of these are 8. There's other ways that you can do this. This just happens to be the way that I did this one. So that's okay. So I'm going to save that, and I'm going to go back out to my browser. I'm going to refresh. Here are all of my images. Now we need to start working on the transition. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go back to Dreamweaver, and this one we can create a style that affects each winter, spring, summer, and fall. But this is where we can use this season box, because remember, this is common for all of them. So I'm going to go into the HTML again, and remember, see, they each have this season box, and that defines like the height and the width and the opacity of that image. So I'm going to go in and create a new style, and this one I'm just going to call season box :hover. Remember, when we are doing links, we can do hover states. That's what this is doing, meaning when you mouse over it, do this behavior. So here is the style that we're going to use, and all we're changing in this particular exercise is the opacity. And we're going to change the opacity so that it goes back up to 1 or 100%. So I'm going to save that, and we're going to go take a look at what this does before we put in our transition effect. So I'm going to refresh, and notice it immediately transitions, right? It just goes from one state to the next. And it works with each of these as I'm mousing over each of these images. So let's go back to Dreamweaver. And we need to make this transition so that it doesn't go immediately from one to the other. So what we're going to say is in Season Box that we want it to transition, and we want it to transition at a slower rate, and we're going to leave, remember, the properties, we only need the transition property. In this case, that transition property is our season box. And we need to have the duration. So in this case, I'm going to say 3 seconds. Actually, you know what? I'm going to do 2 seconds, make it a little bit shorter. That's going to say that the transition is just going to go 2 seconds. So it's a little bit longer than the immediate. So I'm going to save that, and I'm going to go back out to my browser. I'm going to refresh this. And notice how there's that more gradual change as it's doing this. Just to exaggerate it, let's go and change this from 2 seconds to 5 seconds. I'm going to save it, go back out here, refresh, and look at how much slower that goes when I mouse in and out of that image, or mouse from one image to the next. This is what transition effects are doing, and this is affecting the property of opacity. So for the sake of this assignment, I'm going to leave this at 2 seconds. So I'm going to revert that back, but you can leave it at whatever you want as long as the transition itself works. Go ahead and save these, and now you can close this. This is the end of exercise 1.